In this lesson, we'll take a look at how to draw a tiger with colored pencils. We'll be using Polychromos oil-based pencils by Faber-Castell. We'll start with a light graphite sketch of just the contours on Stonehenge paper. We're using a light gray here. Then we'll start in the areas of the eyes, since this will be the focal point. We'll start with an application of dark cadmium yellow before addressing the highlights and lighter values with white. Then we can start addressing some of the darker values, this time initially with burnt sienna. You can see in this case the darker values exist underneath the eyelid, around the pupil and highlight, and around the edges of the eye as well. Then over the top of this we'll add an application of raw umber. To make the color a bit brighter, we'll add a bit of dark chrome yellow, and then to darken the values slightly, we'll add a bit of walnut brown. Then it's time to address the pupil, and in this case we'll simply use black. We're careful to avoid the areas of highlight, however. Keeping with the black, we can darken up some of the values around the edges of the eye just slightly. Now, the areas outside of the iris and pupil are extremely dark, so we'll use an application of black here initially. There are a couple of subtle highlights that happen around the iris and just underneath the iris. We'll leave these areas alone and then continue darkening up the areas of black around the eye. As we begin extending these applications down below the eye, we get into areas of fur, so we'll pull strokes in the direction that the fur grows. Then we can go back to those lighter areas that we left alone and put a bit of cold gray. We'll also make the highlight in those areas that we applied the cold gray a bit cooler with a bit of sky blue. To make some of the darker areas feel a bit more natural, we'll go over the top of it with a bit of red-violet. We'll continue with these applications of red-violet all around the eye, extending up above the eye where the eye meets the fur. Then it's back with the black again, cleaning up some of those highlight shapes that happen underneath the iris and around the iris. We can begin the process of extending some of the fur applications out from this first eye. We'll start with an application of white. Here again, we're paying attention to the direction that the fur grows. This dictates what direction we pull the strokes made with the pencil. At this point, I see I need to darken up some of the shadows inside of the eye, so we'll go back in this area with a bit of burnt sienna. Since we already have a number of strong strokes made with the white in place, we can lightly go over the top of it with a bit of burnt ochre. This gives the fur a more natural appearance and it fills in some of the darker spaces in between the white strokes. We'll add a bit of this burnt ochre in several areas around the eye. The burnt ochre will be our primary or base color used for the orange sections of the fur, so we'll extend this application out in areas. Then we can go back with the black and start addressing some of the black patterns that happen in the fur. With the sharpened black, we can go back in and create a few indications of some smaller hairs, even over the top of the orange sections. We'll continue addressing the patterns around the eye. First, we'll extend applications of white up a bit further, and of course we'll address the darker areas as we go, again with applications of black. In this case, I'm leaving a thin line that I'll address with a white application later. This thin line will look like a stray white hair that extends over the top of the darker area. We'll continue going back and forth between our white and black, and then occasionally adding a bit of the burnt ochre. And like we'll do throughout the drawing process, we'll consider the direction of the strokes that are made with the pencil. These strokes, of course, should mimic the direction that the hair is growing. This not only will lead to the illusion of realistic texture, but it will also aid in creating the illusion of form. As we get closer to the center portion of the face, the directional strokes change slightly. Instead of making longer tapered strokes, we'll make shorter strokes that curl over themselves, and in some cases just small circles will suffice. Over the top of our initial burnt ochre applications, we'll add a bit of dark cadmium yellow with a light touch. Then to make this section a bit brighter and stronger with color, we'll go back over the top in areas with an application of terracotta. The color terracotta is quite a bit more orange than our burnt ochre. We won't cover the area entirely, just in small sections. Then, to add some of the darker values in between and make the pattern feel a bit more realistic, we'll go back with a bit of walnut brown. Small strokes are also added in areas with the walnut brown to indicate a bit more of the longer strands of fur. Then, for now, we'll move on to our second eye. Here again, we'll begin creating some of the darker values within the eye with an application of raw umber. Then, to make things a bit brighter, we'll go over the top with dark cadmium yellow in areas, and then continue the process of darkening the values with raw umber and a bit of burnt sienna in areas. Again, most of the darker values exist underneath the eyelid, around the pupil, and around the edges of the iris. We'll address the second eye in the same manner as we did the first, using black for the pupil and darkening up the areas around the iris with the black as well. We'll also be sure to add just a touch of sky blue on the highlight to make the highlight feel a bit more natural. In the lighter areas around the iris, we can address it again with a bit of the cold gray, and again a touch of the sky blue. And just as we did with the first eye, we'll change the directional strokes underneath the eye to mimic the direction that the fur is growing. We'll also add an application of red violet over the top of these applications to make the black feel a bit more natural. And then we can continue extending out from the second eye just as we did with the first with applications of white. With a sharpened black, we can go back and ease transitions between the dark areas and the light areas. In between, we can add a bit of burnt ochre to ease these transitions and make the fur appear more natural. Then we can simply continue to address the orange sections of the face with the burnt ochre, pulling strokes in the direction that the fur grows. It's important to note here that this is a patient process. When you're using colored pencils, it is going to take a while to build up the applications of color. In this drawing, we're using multiple layers of colors to create a representational appearance. A lot of times, new artists will only put one or two applications down and wonder why their drawing is not looking representational. Oftentimes, it's just a matter of applying additional applications of color, similar colors, colors in the same family, to build up a representational appearance. So keep this in mind as you work. The more layers that you add, typically the more representational your drawing will appear. At this point, we can simply continue creating the patterns on the side of the face by alternating applications of white, burnt ochre, and black. In the white section in the lower left-hand corner, there's a bit of shadow that's happening. To address this shadow, we'll add a bit of cold gray number 4 over the top of the white, and then just a bit of the burnt ochre in areas. Over the top of this entire section, we'll add a bit of the dark cadmium yellow. This application is a light application with very little pressure. This will just slightly alter the color. Then we can go back and start addressing some of the darker applications or darker areas within the fur. We'll start with an application of burnt sienna, again pulling strokes in the direction that the fur grows. Then with walnut brown, we can go back and make some of these values slightly darker. We can also add a few additional details. The walnut brown can also be used to ease transition between the dark spots and the orange and white sections. Then it's time to make things a bit more brighter and stronger in areas with the terracotta. We'll add a bit of color to the white section in the upper left-hand corner of the image with an application of burnt ochre and a bit of walnut brown. With the sharpened walnut brown, we can also add a few indications of smaller hairs. A bit of cold gray number 4 is lightly applied underneath the upper portion of the eye to strengthen the shadow. In the center middle portion, the upper right-hand corner, and the lower right-hand portion of the drawing will address the fur in the same manner. Darker areas are defined with black before pulling layered strokes with burnt ochre, raw umber, dark cadmium yellow, and walnut brown. For the middle portion, however, we're going to need to change our pattern a bit. We'll start with smaller strokes and in some areas a bit of a circular stroke with burnt ochre. Then over the top, we'll add a light application of dark cadmium yellow. From here, we'll start addressing some of the darker values, starting with an application of raw umber. Again, small strokes are made in areas. We want to create quite a bit of variety of value here. Of course, the snout of the tiger extends outward. This means that the darker values will exist primarily on either side of the snout. We can strengthen some of the values in areas by adding additional applications of black and walnut brown. Here again, we're very careful with the strokes that are made with a pencil. These strokes again create the illusion of texture and lead to the illusion of form as well. Dark chrome yellow is added in areas to make the color a bit brighter and stronger. Then to make some of the oranges a bit more vibrant, we can go back with the terracotta, mainly on either side of the snout. With a sharpened white pencil, we can go back and make some of the areas a bit lighter, and we can also create a few indications of some small stray hairs. Then we'll continue the process of pushing the value range with a bit of walnut brown. Here again, just like in the other areas, the walnut brown not only creates darker values in areas, but it also creates a few indications of some details like darker areas of fur. And at this point, since some of the oranges need to be strengthened even further, an application of cadmium orange is used in areas. Then it's back to the burnt ochre to fill in some of the spaces that have been left unaddressed. And now our colored pencil drawing of a tiger is complete. If you enjoyed this video, then why not subscribe to the channel? And if you're ready to learn more about drawing and painting, then check out our comprehensive membership program, which includes comprehensive video courses, weekly live lessons, ebooks, lesson plans, and so much more. To learn more about our program, just click on the button in the center of your screen or click on the card in the upper right-hand corner. Thank you so much for watching.